All right. So this morning we are going to be talking about nested iteration. We are going to be sort of expanding our skills with iterating over collections and using enumerables. We aren't going to be learning any new methods today. We're going to be using all methods that we have seen before. I'm like 99% sure. But we're going to be sort of expanding on our existing skills. So a lot of today is going to be in breakout rooms and doing some paired work with me, sort of synthesizing at the end. We are going to be using the nested iteration lesson, which I dropped in the 2105 Code Help Slack channel. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and I want to start us off with just some individual warm up here. So the link to the lesson is here in your Slack channel. So if you have not pulled it up, go ahead and do that. And then what we're going to do for the first, let's go for like 7 minutes. Yeah, for like 7 minutes. I would like y'all individually to work through as much of this warm up as you can. If you don't get through it all in 7 minutes, no big deal. But I want to give y'all 7 minutes to work through this individually. And then I'm going to walk through one of these problems, and then we'll jump into some practice. Any questions? Cool. Okay, so let's take about 7 minutes individually. At 9:10, I will start walking through one of these questions. I'm going to pause the recording for just a moment. Okay, great. So hopefully y'all were able to get through at least a couple of those problems. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Before I jump into solving one of these, I would love to hear from some folks. If you got through this first question, returning an array of animals as strings, what enumerable did y'all use? Does anyone want to share what enumerable they used for this first one? Yeah, Sammy, go for it.
I used map.
Cool. And can you remind us, what does map do?
It returns a new array.
And what's in that new array?
Whatever you are manipulating. So each element of the array, it'll manipulate it for in this example, you would do .2s to each element, and then it will return a new array of the manipulated elements.
Awesome. Yeah, map is a great choice here, and it will give us a new array of elements that have been manipulated based on what we've done in the block. Great job. Cool. Who wants to tell me what enumerable they used for the second one, returning an array of animals whose length is greater than or equal to 4? Yeah, Brian, go for it.
I use find all.
Cool. And what does find all do?
Returns all of the elements within the array that meet the criteria that you lay out.
Cool. And where do you lay out that criteria?
In the block.
In the block. Excellent. And when you're determining, or when you're setting the criteria, do you use an if statement?
I didn't. I guess
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do not and don't want to use an if statement. So you could sort of like monkey patch it a little bit to say like, yeah, I could use an if statement with find all and force it to work, but you really don't want to do that. Find all should find the things without needing the if statement. You just put the condition in the block. Great. Awesome. Catherine, did you have a question about that?
Yeah, so I used animals map animal if animal.length greater than or equal to 4.compact. Is it okay to use the if you're using like a map, or is that still kind of a silly way to go about it?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty unconventional. So if you use a map, it is always going to give you an array of the same length. And what's happening with that if statement is if the animal has the length that you're looking for, it will send that animal to the new array. If not, map needs to do something with that like position in the
gives it nil.
original array. Yeah, and so it's actually going to send nil because the if statement was never like invoked. You never did anything with that, and so the return value of that block is nil. So it's going to send nils down to the new array for any element that doesn't meet your criteria, which you were able to get around that by calling .compact on it, which will remove all the nils. But it's sort of like a maybe not a hacky way, but it's the non-conventional way of using map, where if you are using map and you find yourself having to call .compact on the end of it, you probably would rather be using a find all. Awesome. All right, cool. So I want to walk through just this first question related to nested animals. And this is going to sort of like help us understand what we are tackling today. So let me make this a little bit bigger. Is that text big enough? If not, please let me know. Let me make this text a little bigger. Cool. All right, great. So with this next piece, we have this nested animals array, and this is an array of arrays. And I want to try and get an array of all of these animals as strings. So similar to the first problem, returning an array of animals as strings, the only difference is instead of having an unnested array to work with, I am working with a nested array. So this is going to look slightly different. I am going to start this with each. So let me just put my goal here. Goal is one unnested array of animal strings. I'm going to start this with each, and then we'll talk about what enumerables I might use. So with each, I know that I need to store the result that I want somewhere. So I'm going to call this animal strings because I'm bad at naming things. And we'll start that as an empty array. Then I'm going to be eaching over my nested animals. And as I iterate over any collection, I want to be pretty thoughtful about what I call my block variable. What I try and do is call my block variable by the thing. Well, let me rephrase that. I try to make my names very descriptive to what that variable is pointing to. So if I'm iterating over nested animals, I don't really want to call this block variable animal because I'm not really iterating over single animals at this point. What am I iterating over? Who can tell me what I'm iterating over? Yeah, Matt K.
Separate arrays.
Yeah, I'm iterating over separate arrays. So as I each over nested animals, the first element in this nested animals array is an array of animals. So I might call this, like our block variable is going to be representing this array of animals. I might call this something like animals, maybe, because it is an array of animals. I might call it like animal array, maybe. I try not to call things by the data type that they are. But animal array might be like the most clear, maybe animals, something like that. But as I'm iterating over nested animals, each element is going to be one of these arrays that is in my original array. Cool, so let's go ahead and let's end that each. And I want to pull on this string even a little bit more. Let me throw a pry in here and let's take a look at what this animal array looks like. Let's go ahead and run this. And inside my iteration, inside my each, I have access to now an animal array, and it is that array of 3 animals, okay? So now I'm inside of an each, I can nest another each inside of this outer each. So I can each over this animal array to turn them all into strings. And so what I'll do here is I can say animal array dot each do. And now in my block variable, now I am going to be iterating over a single animal. So I'm going to call this block variable animal. Okay, and if I throw a pry back in here, we can see this again. Oh, can't quite see the bottom of my terminal there, can you? Excuse me. So in my nested iteration, I now have access to a single animal. Do I also have access to my animal array? Can I get like a thumbs up, thumbs down? Do I have access to animal array? I see a couple thumbs. Let's see. Yep, I do have access to animal array. So this is a scope thing, remembering back to our scope lesson where things can flow in to these blocks, but not necessarily out of them. Okay, so at line 11, I have access to animal, I have access to animal array, I have access to animal strings, that placeholder array. I even have access to nested animals. Probably wouldn't want to do anything with it at this point, but I've got access to all of these variables. And so now that I'm looking at a single animal, I can shovel that animal as a string, .2s, into my animal strings array. And if I throw a pry in here again at the very end, I now have animal strings, a single unnested array of all of the animals as strings. I'm going to pause here for a second, take a look at the code that I've written, and what questions do y'all have? I'll give you just a few seconds to think of some questions. All right, let's start with Antonio. Antonio, what question do you have?
Why couldn't you have done like a nested animals dot flatten dot map, like mess with the array and then iterate through it?
I could have. I definitely could have done that. Instead of like all of this, I could have said like nested animals dot flatten, and that will take that nested array and flatten into one and then call a dot map. I could do that. There are going to be times though when you don't necessarily want to flatten that collection before you iterate over it, particularly when you have a collection that has other types of collections inside of it. So what if this array had hashes inside? I couldn't flatten that. So yeah, I definitely could have, but I'm using this as sort of a contrived example to show some nested iteration. Great question. Any other questions about this so far? Yeah, Corinna.
So when you are doing like nested iterations, do you want to use the same like .each, or could you do .each .map?
Yeah, so I can use some other enumerables, and I do want to show that. So great question. Corinna, where might I want to use the map? Like I'm definitely transforming some things. Where would I want to put the map?
The animal array dot map, since
Cool.
that's already split.
I like it. I'm going to go ahead and yeah, I'll just fix this inline. So if we want to map all of our animals to a string, it does feel appropriate, or it feels like it might work to put our map here. So if that's working, ideally, I should be able to say that the result of all of this animal, let's see, animal strings is our array of animal strings. Okay, I like this map here because these are the animals that we want to change to a string. Let's take a look at this code just for a second. And I'd love to hear, like, do we think this is going to work? Who would like to tell me if this is or is not going to work and why? Yeah, Caroline.
Will we need a dot flatten? So, or will it still return like an array and an array kind of?
Maybe. I like that thought. Anyone else have other thoughts? Michael.
I'm guessing that because the first enumerator is a dot each, that the return value will be the original array or whatever dot each returns, right?
Cool. I like that thought. Yeah, I love this idea of thinking about like what is going to be returned from each method, and also what impact does that have on the other methods that are being called. Like, what is the return value of map in each? Does that mean we're going to have to flatten something? Yeah, I love all this. Let's go to Blake.
There we go. Sorry. Right on the edge of each screen. If you use the dot each, don't you need to put it somewhere like an accumulator or something?
Yeah, and why do we need to do that, Blake?
Well, I mean, it's just what we were told to do. So
It's
you
just
know.
what we do. Yeah. And the reason we do it that way is because the return value of each is the original array. So let's do some commenting here. Map is going to give us, is going to return us, let's use our actual keys here. It's going to return a new array with all elements transformed by the block. Okay, so that's what this is going to return. Each will always return the original, wow, I cannot type today, will always return the original array or collection. Okay, so this whole thing, what is it going to return? Let's see. Let me go ahead and exit this pry, run it again. And if I look at animals, what did I call this? Animal strings, we have the original array. Okay, so with this nested iteration, it is really important to think about what is the return value of each piece of this, and how is that nesting going to impact or not impact that return value. So because each is our outermost iteration, that is going to be sort of the boss return value. It's going to sort of take over all the other return values. Now, we are mapping over this animal array, and we are getting it, we are turning each of these into that array of strings, but the each is just sort of like, cool, I did it, done, nothing more to see here. So we also need to do we need to do some other enumerable here. So instead of each, what might we want to use on our nested animals? Any thoughts? Marla, go for it.
We could do a flat map.
Talk to me about flat map. What does flat map do?
So it does the same thing as map, but it flattens it out into one array rather than if there were multiple arrays in there,
Cool.
keeping the multiple arrays spread out.
I like it. I like it. I want to step through this a little bit I want to do a little smaller step first. And let's see what happens if we just use map. And then we'll talk about flat map and how that is working. Cool. So what if I map on this nested animals array, which this will now give me, that's not what I wanted. That way. This map should give me a new array with all elements transformed by the block. And so let's see what this gives us. And so let me look at our animal strings. Okay, cool. So now we've got an array of arrays, and our subarrays are animals as strings. So we're getting closer, right? We're no longer getting the original array. And so now what we can do with this array of arrays is flatten it. So we could say animal strings dot flatten, and this is the array. This is the unnested array that we're looking for. Okay. So going back to just our regular animal strings not flattened. What's happening here is as we map over our nested animals, which is like this array and this array, we are turning those elements into whatever the return value of this block is. And since this block is mapping those subarrays, we are getting those new subarrays in place of our original subarrays. And so what we want to do to sort of flatten this out is call dot flatten. Now, to Marla's point, there is a really handy enumerable called flat map that does that mapping and flattening all in one go. So instead of having to call animal strings dot flatten at the end, if we use flat map, we're doing a map and flatten all in one go. So if we exit, run this again, and look at our animal strings, now it is our single unnested string array of animal strings. All right. Now, we did this with flat map and map. We also did it with each. I think, you know, a lot of times when I'm working with iteration, I start with each and refactor to an enumerable later. I think especially when I'm working with nested iteration, I start with each and refactor to an enumerable later because of this idea of, or because of the importance of the return value of every single method call. It is easier, I think, sometimes to start with the simple each, do whatever you need to do in the block, send it to your placeholder, and then refactor to a more complicated, or a refactor to an enumerable later. Just my own personal opinion. Yeah, Dane.
Yeah, if you wanted to test this without pry, like using puts, could you do that?
Yeah.
Like where would you put the puts?
Yeah, I would just put animal strings here after I've run the iteration. And now if I exit and run this, yeah, puts does some weird things to my array, but that's what that looks like. You could also use, I think P will give us, yeah, will show us the actual array. Yep.
Okay, that's the issue I was having.
Okay, no worries. Any other questions on this? Yeah, Michael.
Is it possible on, so in the nested array, if you assign the map that's nested inside, if you assign that to a variable, can you capture the map that way as a return? And I was thinking more of it too before we did the initial flat map when we had like the dot each, but I mean, I guess the question doesn't really.
Yeah, so original array. So this will simply assign this return value to a variable. Each will still return the original array. Each will still return the original array. Yep.
No problem.
So I think another piece here is like, you can use each, or you can use enumerables. I hardly ever find a situation where I'm using an enumerable and each together.
Okay.
Cool. Other questions so far? Let me go back to where it was working. All right. If there are no other questions, let's go ahead and take a palm. Let's come back at 9:39 and we'll jump into some breakout rooms to practice this. So we'll come back at 9:39 or 39 after whatever hour it is for you. All right, cool. So what we're going to be doing next is we're going to jump into some breakout rooms and practice some nested iteration. Let me share my screen. Oh, share. In the lesson, there is a link to a practice repo. So we're going to be working off of this repo. You don't need to fork it if you don't want to. You can simply clone it down, or you can fork and clone. It's up to you. And y'all are going to be in groups of about 3, and I'd like for y'all to go through this exercise. There are some classes and some tests already built. Most of the tests are already passing. There are 4 tests that are skipped that you'll want to unskip based on the order that it says here, and make them pass. This is a sort of weird repo. It's a sort of weird project. So I would say like the first few minutes that you're in your group, you're going to want to like do some exploring around the classes and tests and try and get familiar with what's going on in here before you jump in. There are a couple of rules that I want you to follow. Please do not create any additional instance variables. Do not change anything about the tests except for unskipping them. And do not create any helper methods. Okay, we're sort of making some contrived examples to really practice this nested iteration piece. Let me think, is there anything else that I need to mention in here? Yeah, as you explore this repo, I would read through like the interaction patterns to help you understand what's going on. And y'all are gonna have 45 minutes to work on this. So I'm gonna send you into groups for about 45 minutes. During that time, if you need to take a palm, do so, because at 10:30 or around that time, yeah, let's just say 10:30. At 10:30, I will be doing a walkthrough of this exercise, okay? So at 10:30, we will definitely be all back together. I'll be doing a walkthrough of this. Any questions so far about what I'm asking you to do? Okay, when you're in your breakout rooms, if you need help, just use the raise hand to ask for help and I will come assist you. Otherwise, if there are no other questions, I will send you off. We will see you back here at 10:30. All right, great. So I know some of you were still working, that's okay. I'm gonna walk through at least some of this exercise for y'all. I've already done the first bit. I've already done the first skipped test, which was in the course spec to get all of the student groups that are represented. So you can see that here. I'll give y'all just a second to look at what I've done, see if you have any questions about this piece so far.
Our group did it backwards.
Backwards? That's okay.
Yeah, we Oh, maybe not. Maybe not.
Blake, did you have a question?
Yeah, if you have the map, don't you need to have the what you call it, equaling to it? So like that could be like something equals to @students.map.
So like maybe groups
Yeah.
equal. Yeah, so this will work. Let me pull up my terminal here. So if I run this, this will work. I've got 0 failures, but it's unnecessary. So map itself returns a new array. So the return value of this call is going to be a new array. And then I am asking it to be a unique list of things. So the return value of this method is the new array. You don't need to assign it to a variable. Now, you would need to assign it to a variable if you wanted to say like call unique on something like groups. So if instead of tagging the unique onto the end of end, I could say groups equals this map, and then ask it to give me the unique values. Does that answer your question? Cool. Awesome. Any other questions about this before we jump into the school methods? Cool. All right. And this one, of course, was not a nested iteration. Just threw this in here to help us get familiar with all the objects that we're working with. So let's go ahead and jump over to the school. And the first test that we need to work on is assigning all students to their student groups at once. So if we look at the school, there is a way to assign a single student to a student group, but we want to be able to do it all at once. So I'm going to go ahead and run this test. I did not unskip it. Let me unskip it. And let's run this. I should have an undefined method. Great. So I need group all students. So let's group all students. And now I should have a failing test. Yep, great. So this is a failure. I expected some true and false values, or I expected some true values. I'm getting some false values because I'm expecting after I call this group all students method, I'm expecting all of my students to have a group. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but they should all have one. So what I would need to do here, I'm going to throw a pry in this group all students. Whenever I'm working with like lots of different objects at once, I always try and figure out where is the data that I need, or where are the objects that I need before I start writing any code. So I want to get sort of a full picture of what my world looks like in this method before I get going. So let's go ahead and run this. And here inside my method, I am inside of a school, and I could see that by looking at what is myself right now. What is the object that this method is being called on right now? It is a school, and this school has courses, and each of these courses has students, and none of these students are grouped at the moment. And so I need to get at each of these student objects so that I can assign them to a group. So I need to go into my courses and into my students and assign each student to a group. So let's go ahead and start this process. I'm going to start with each and refactor later if I need to. So I know I'm going to have to start with courses because that is where my students are living. So I'm going to say courses.each do. And each of these things is an individual course. So I'm going to call my block variable a course. And I'm going to throw a pry in here and see sort of where I'm at this point. Oops. Pull this back up. Oops, exit. Let's run this. Okay, cool. So I'm inside of my courses. each. And I now have access to a course. And in my course, I have access to course.students. And this is where my students are living. It's inside of an array. And so in order to assign each of these students, I need to iterate over this array while I am iterating over my courses. Okay, so in my method here, I can start some nested iteration to say course.students.each. I want to sort of isolate my students array, call each on it. And now here I am iterating over an individual student. If I throw a pry in here, I should now have access to a single student object. Student, cool. I also have access right here to all of the methods that are in this class. So in this class, I have this method assigned to group. So I can use this method to assign a student to a group. So since I have access to a single student object, I should be able to call assign to group and send that method this student. Okay, and then if I look at the student again, now the student is assigned to a specific group. So in my each here, I can call assign to group, assign to group, this student that I am iterating over at the moment. And I think that's all I need to do. So let's exit, let's run this. Great, that is passing. Any questions about this? Yeah, Catherine.
So while working with Madeline, I've found that like I use each a lot, and I have not moved on to using different enumerables. Do you typically see like each used the most just because it's the easiest to comprehend?
I wouldn't say necessarily that I see each used the most, but every iterative problem that you could use an enumerable on, you can use each. And each is in some ways the most powerful enumerable because, or the most powerful way of iterating because you are in full control of what happens. There's nothing going on behind the scenes other than we are iterating over each element. There's no like new array being created. There's no filtering going on. It sort of puts all the power in your hands. That being said, I don't know that it's used the most. I maybe use it the most. I think it's more of a personal preference.
Like I use like sort by and group by based on like whether I want to do like an hash or array, like return value, but I just feel like each is like the easiest one to make sense of.
Yeah, I say like use what works for you.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, cool. So we've got all of our students being grouped. I want to show another way of doing this that you'll see pretty frequently. So we've got sort of two collections that we're iterating over. We are iterating over all of our courses so that we can iterate over all of our students so that we can assign each student to a group. Now, sometimes what you'll see folks do is instead of nesting this iteration, which this nesting is, without going down a rabbit hole, this nesting can be a little bit more resource intensive from your computer's standpoint. Sometimes what you'll see folks do is iterate over courses to get all the students, and then iterate over all the students to assign them to a group. And so what that might look like is, if I comment this out here, I might first want to get all of my, geez, I can't type. I might first want to get all of my students by iterating over all of my courses. And let's see here, I'm probably going to want to use something like a flat map. Actually, you know what, I'll do this with each. So I might first want to iterate over my courses. Course to get all of my students. So I'm going to shovel course.students into my students array. And now I have, if I throw a pry in here, my students is going to be a nested array of student objects. So I probably want to flatten this, students.flatten. And this flattened array will give me a single array where I can then each over that. And for each student, I can assign them to a group. And I'm just going to run this test just to show that this works. Cool, so that's passing. So 2 different ways of accomplishing the same thing. In this first solution, I am iterating over my courses. And as I iterate over my courses, for each course, I'm iterating over all of its students. Then for the next course, I'm iterating over all of its students. And for the next course, I'm iterating over all of its students. So I'm doing a nested iteration here. With this other possible solution, I'm sort of like pulling those iterations apart. First, I'm getting all of my students, and then I'm assigning all of the students to a group. Okay, 2 different ways of accomplishing the same thing. Any questions so far? Yeah, let's go Sammy and then Dane.
So for the first like lines 19 through 21, specifically I guess for line 20, is it frowned upon to chain that each onto course.students, like as far as law of Demeter goes, or is this an exception?
Yeah, so I think the law of Demeter, like, are we technically breaking law of Demeter here? Yes. Is this an egregious infraction of the law? No. So I think with law of Demeter, there's things that are like, great, you are not breaking any law of Demeter. There's things that are like, you're sort of doing like a little bit of breakage here, but it wouldn't really make sense to have the course be responsible for assigning students. I'm okay with this. If we were doing like course.students.something.something.something.each, then it would feel like more of a serious infraction of the law.
Okay, so if we started with like lines 25 through 30, and we could cut it to less lines of code by doing that first bit, which one would you choose? Like, would you break law of Demeter to save lines of code, or would you keep it bigger to not break law of Demeter?
I personally would choose lines 19 to 23, not because of law of Demeter, but because of the number of times I'm iterating over each individual object. So with lines 25 through 31, I'm iterating over courses. And then I am, let's see, iterating courses, and I'm flattening that. Yeah, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but yeah, I would err on the side of the fewest times iterating over a single object.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Dane.
Yeah, I actually just had a question about the assign to group method.
Yeah.
Why is .sample being used there?
It's assigning a random group to the student. So sample will pull
Yeah.
a random element from an array.
Okay, so it's not actually like looking at the students group and then comparing that to the available groups. Okay.
No,
okay.
it's
I just wanted to make
assign.
sure.
Yeah, it's assigning it. The student group is an adder accessor so that we can assign it from other classes.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Caroline.
Our group used .map instead of .each, and it passes, but is that, I guess, kind of an unnecessary use of .map, and should we have
Yes.
used .each?
Yeah, it's an unnecessary use of map because I don't really care what the return value of this method is. I care that it has assigned a group to each student. So in this case, like it, it works, right? So done is better than perfect. But the most appropriate thing would be to use each here because we don't care what the return value of this method is.
Okay, so you're just trying to isolate the student, so that's why it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Okay.
Awesome. Great questions. All right, cool. I want to get through at least one more of these methods. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. So let's see. The next one is we can list all students by name. So here we want to be able to call names on a school and get a list of all of the students' names. Okay, great. So good TDD. I'm going to run my test first. Okay, undefined method names for the school. So let's go ahead and define names. And let's see this fail. Great, we're expecting an array of strings. We're getting nil. So again, here we're trying to, we're actually not trying to isolate a student. For this, we are actually trying to transform and create a new array of student names. I'm going to start this with each and then refactor to use map. So let's say, let's start an accumulator. Student names equals an empty array. And I know from the work that I did with grouping all my students that in order to get to single students, I need to iterate over courses. And each course has students. So I'm going to iterate over the students. And then I want to shovel the student, let's shovel, student.name into my student names array, and my inner each and my outer each, and each will return the original array. So I need to return my student names out of here. I think we're going to get some duplicates, but let's run it and see where we are. Okay, yeah, we're getting some duplicates. Yeah, Luna, yeah, okay, cool. So here I could do a couple things. I could check to see like if student names include this student name. No, that doesn't make sense. Unless the student name include that student name, we want to shovel the name in. I think this will give me what I want. Okay. So I could check to see that the student name is not included before I shovel that name in. Or I could do sort of what I did before, which is I could call unique, not unique question mark, call unique on the student names to tell it to give me a unique list of student names. And that will work. So that's how we could do it with each. We could also do this with maps. So if I comment this out, here what I want to do is, oh, Dane, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a question on why, when you know when to use a method on like returning that there on line 40 versus like putting it on an end.
Yeah, so if I put the unique on the end here, it is going to call unique on the return value of this each. And what does each return?
Oh, the original array.
The original
you-
array.
The
Yeah.
actual
So
student name.
if I did this, it would give me a unique list of courses.
Okay.
So because I'm trying to get a unique list of names, I first need to store those names somewhere, and then I can call unique on that list of names.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Cool. So we saw how that's working with each. We could also use a map and flat map scenario similar to what we did in the warm up. So what I can do is I can say, I want my courses to flat map for me all of their student names. So for each course, I want a map, of course.students.map do student.name. And so here what's going to happen is as I iterate over courses, I am going to map the students to be just their name. So this inner iteration is going to give me an array of student names. If I was using simply map here, the return value of this would be an array of arrays, and the subarrays would be the students' names. So for each course, it would give me an array of their names. So I can actually run this and show you that. Cool. So we're getting an array of arrays. So there's like 1, 2, 3 subarrays in here. Okay. So I could do 2 different things. I could say, after all is said and done, let's go ahead and flatten. And then I am going to need to call unique because I'll get some duplicate values with flatten. Or whenever I see this combination of map and then immediately flattening the end of it, I can use the enumerable flat map. And that will do the mapping and flattening all in one. And then ask it to give me a unique list of those names. So if I run this, that passes. Give you a second to look at this and see if you have any questions. Now, again, I could decouple these nested iterations and first get the students and then ask for their names, or I could do them in this nested way where I am getting the student names as I'm iterating over each course. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is sort of related, Sammy, to your question earlier about law of Demeter. In our group all students, this to me does not really break law of Demeter all that much, because what we're doing is we're trying to isolate each student and run a method that is internal to this school on that student. So if I wanted to move this function or this method or its functionality to the course, I would have to like send the course the school or some other piece of information. So to me, it doesn't make a ton of sense to push this functionality down to the course itself. But it does make a little bit more sense that a course should be able to give me all of its students' names. Okay, so in this case with law of Demeter, I'm thinking less about the number of method calls I'm making and more about the responsibility of each class. It is the responsibility of the school to assign any given student to a group. And so I'm going to keep all this together. And in addition to that, it doesn't make sense in this school environment for a course to be responsible for assigning a student to a group. it could make a little bit more sense that a course is responsible for giving all of its student names. So I might want to make a method on the course to give the student names. Now for this exercise, I asked y'all not to create helper methods, but outside of the rules of this exercise, like if I'm just thinking about really good programming design, I might make a method on my course that gave me student names. And this would probably be an array of student names. So I would still want to flat map on that and call unique, but I'm pushing the responsibility of getting those names down to the course where it makes sense that a course might be responsible for getting that information. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and break. I'm gonna make Mike the host. Actually, let me stop recording. So
Do you
we
need
have
more
two
time?
separate recordings. No, I'm good.
Cool.
Let me pause.